Talk is here. Power 102 Digital.
Yes, it is. Good afternoon. This is the Power 102 Digital Monday. Hard Talk starts now. We have our host, Karen Nunez Tesheira, on the set with me. Good afternoon, Karen.
Good afternoon, David. And I think you want to go to start from this, and good afternoon, especially to our many viewers all and listeners all over the world that tune in to Hard Talk on a Monday with myself and David McIntyre, always giving me that support. Although it's not his official role, it certainly feels as though it has become an official rule. But we have a new and exciting format because we said our hosts, well, we're supposed to be joined, I hopefully soon, just looking out right now, for a format, an approach that we think will be, I think it would be exciting. It will bring a different point of view, and that is we'll have co-hosts. And the co-hosts, I will be continuing to be a co-host, but we have with us someone who's no stranger to Trinidad and Tobago, and that is Deniese Demming. But before I go into the more details, and I see Deniese join us, I would ask David, as he always does, to let the viewers, the listeners, know the numbers, and also what we did last week. It was I think we were fairly successful with that, actually taking a break in which we allowed viewers and listeners to call in at that particular time rather than at any time during the show. So David, hand over to you and get the numbers up, and I'll go further into a little bit about our co-hosts going forward.
Okay, thank you, Karen. The numbers that you can connect with us are 222-8255, 222-8255. Our toll-free number, 866-525-1099. Toll-free, 866-525-1099. And you can also send your messages and comments via WhatsApp 318-1021. WhatsApp 318-1021. And like Karen said, at 5 o'clock, we're going to take that telephone break where you can call in and comment on whatever we're talking about here on the topic today.
Yes, thank you very much for that, David. And what we would also do, because we like to have a subject matter expert, I think it gives perspective, it brings value, it's instructive, not only to you, the listeners, to us. We learn a lot. And we have people who come on who know more about the topic than the ordinary man in the street. And even that's why they call subject matter experts. So we are going to have our subject matter expert, and I'll introduce in more detail at the appropriate time. She's joining us a little later on. Around the 5 o'clock, so maybe about 10 past 5 perhaps. And I know she also is no stranger, but I'll speak about her later on. And that's Dr. Gabriel Jamil Hussain, who is a senior lecturer at the University of the West Indies. But let's talk about our co-host, who I'm looking forward to seeing, and everyone can recognize her from her running. I think she's known as being a runner, a blogger, a wellness coach. She's also what you call the co-licensee of TEDx. And TEDx is a global phenomenon that allows persons or individuals through videos, through coaching sessions, through talks in their local environment to talk on topics that are of interest, not only in their area, but of course, globally. And Deniese Demming and that is something, a great accomplishment. It's called TEDx Port of Spain. Port of Spain because it's all global. But she's so much more than that. We all know she's had more than 30 years as what we would call a political commentator. She has been a person who is very, very, very knowledgeable on communications and strategy, event planning. She's been involved with the Rape Crisis Center, communications manager for one of our big companies, worked as a consultant with the AG's office for a while, was a former chairman of the Tourism Development Company. And for those of you who may not know it, she's now even been a co-authored a book with her husband. How did we get here? 42 years. It's 42 or 45 years. I don't want to get the years wrong, but I know how many right vicinity if I say 42. But in any event, wrote a textbook with her, not a textbook, sorry, a novel, a book, maybe a guide to for other people, for other married people, for other couples, as how did we get here? And she launched that last year. In terms of her qualifications, she's well qualified. She has a Master's of Science. She has a EMBA in communications or marketing, HR. And yes, the book is called How Did We Get Here? The Musings of a 45-year couple for its 45 years. So I can't say enough about Denise Demming. I mean, she's just no stranger to us. Looking to see her join us as our co-host. And what we decided, what we thought in trying to keep the show interesting, exciting, and also shake it up a little bit, shake it up a little bit. Denise Demming has certain areas that probably are more, what should I say? I shouldn't use the word interest, but she has a greater perspective on certain issues. I would really have to say a greater perspective on certain issues. And I may have a greater interest on others, mainly because of my training or my background or whatever it may be. But whilst I wait for her to join us, is she in the background, David, by the way?
Not as yet, Karen.
Okay, because that just has me. Yes, because she, well, I'll let you work on that in the meantime. But
Yep.
as you work on that, because what I wanted to do is to take the lead on today's conversation. And you'll understand why, given the introduction, and people know who Denise Demming is. Denise with two N's, I just discovered, always misspelling her name. We are going to pay homage to International Women's Day. It was celebrated by the United Nations on March the 8th. And it really was, if you read up a little bit on it, and then we know it really focuses on gender equality, which is, of course, speaking to the issue that women had these equal rights in as men, their reproductive rights, violence and abuse against women, opportunities for women, both in professional life as well as in many other areas. Well, because I taught courses and wrote on certain areas dealing with property rights when you get divorced, when you get separated, when a death occurs and there's a will, there's no will, the rights of their child. There's so many areas, rape, spousal rape. There's so many areas in which there have been developments in the law, but we know also that there still is that glass ceiling that has not been shattered. I think Denise can speak more to that. So whilst I wait for her to join us, I'm a bit that's why I wanted Denise to take the lead on this, because I think she has a more passionate views on this topic, and perhaps I should have, or maybe because I'm a woman, there would be the assumption that I would. But oftentimes I think, but we won't go down too long that rabbit hole. We won't. I will just mention that, sometimes the men are the ones who now in this period are the ones who are more in crisis or more in certain areas. I'm be very specific, in certain specific areas where we're seeing men being at risk in areas that perhaps because they decided to, the way the world has changed so rapidly, the nurturing component of them as a parent and their entitlement or rights, which were usually those accorded to a woman when a marriage broke up, when there was property settlement, when there were issues of spousal maintenance. Denise is with us. Denise saved the day. Oh my Lord. Denise, have me under pressure.
Sorry.
Oh God, you have me under pressure. You have me under pressure. I hope you heard some of what I said,
No.
Oh my God. I ain't going to repeat it, huh?
Okay, that's fine.
I'm not going to repeat it, but everybody knows who Denise Demming is. But what I did say on your co-authoring of your book, I had to correct myself. How did we get here 45 years? But of course, I spoke very much about your TEDx, Port of Spain, and your involvement there. And in number of, you've done so many things. I don't know how you've managed to do all that and still have the level of energy that you have. but you definitely are a person who is known as a communicator, strategist, someone who understands that word very, very well. And I've held many portfolios that speak to that. But I think you have a passion for women and women gender equality, which I was confessing, and I know I confessed it to you, to Denise, that I may not be as passionate about it. So I want you to take the role. I said you are my co-host going forward. So it's not you interviewing me or I interviewing you. That's not it. We're both doing this, and I'm going to let you take the role, take the lead on this. And I said that around 5 o'clock we're going to be joined by Dr. Gabrielle Hossein. I haven't said much about her background, but she's also well known. But when she joins us at 5, and what we're going to try and do, as you go on, you hopefully try to address things. So one of the things to address is having you with me. That's one good development. The other thing too is carving out a space specifically for persons of calling, because I feel that what I have done in being a novice in this area is just tell people call in, but I don't think they feel when am I going to call in. So they do send messages to David McIntyre, but I'm going to give them like a 10-minute, let them call in. So Deniese, International Women's Day, March the 8th, and how it came about. And I'm really going to ask you your perspective. Do you think, and I'm talking about Trinidad and Tobago, I know we could talk about the globe, because if I started doing that, we go Saudi Arabia, we could go all over the place. But I want to talk about us. Do you think that we in Trinidad and Tobago have achieved gender equality? I know there's a difference between equality and equity. Gender, yes, I did my homework. Gender equality in Trinidad and Tobago, and the areas where you feel where we have failed, and your prescriptions moving forward. What are your views? And take the lead on that.
Thank you very much, Karen, and I am so happy to share this space with you and to continue. Well, hopefully continue. You wouldn't fire me.
Hopefully. I don't like those words, when people say hopefully. You don't put any negative thing in the atmosphere,
All right. So I look forward to continuing to share this space with you because as I'm just very loving of my country, and I feel that Trinidad has so much potential and that we need to get to a stage where we are maximizing the use of our resources and we're doing well. Okay. So that's what has inspired me to be here. You raised the issue, and I had raised it with you about women and gender equality and gender equity and so on. And I just want to tell a little story that I started participating in International Women's Day in 1995. That's a long time ago. I'm not young, and I'm okay with that. But I started in 1995. And at that time, when they had the International Women's Day March downtown on Cipriani, by Cipriani statue, what they had was women from the police services, women from the fire services, they had girl guides, they had female cadet, they had so different women institutions had sent women to participate in the march. And the march began with women in their uniforms and so on. And that march, it messed up Port of Spain for that day, but it was lovely to see the number of women who were involved in it. Then I saw it transition to around the Queen's Park Savannah. And just before COVID, I recall looking at the women around the Queen's Park Savannah and seeing 2 miles of women. Then after COVID, when we came back, I saw maybe about 3/4 of a mile of women. And then this year, it was taken downtown, and I saw about 1/4 of a mile of women. And I've been asking myself, what has happened for women to stop participating in International Women's Day in the way they used to so many years ago? Of course, I don't have the answer.
But I'm going to ask you to give me some of your. I would like to hear some of your views on that, because I may have some opinion which may be entirely wrong. So I would like to hear where we reached from 2 miles to quarter mile.
How did that happen?
Mhm.
Well, I
No.
think that the structured approach to supporting it when it began is no longer there. So this year I saw a lot of police cars around, but I didn't see police women marching. So that structured approach where you would have police, fire services, and so on, that has somehow has changed, and I sincerely hope that it will come back, because it tells a very good statement when you see a structured approach to that kind of march. So that's one of the reasons why I think it has just reduced to that extent. The second reason I think it has reduced is, and this is my view, I think women are losing their voices in this country.
Mhm.
So they're not coming out and saying what they think. They're just sitting down and saying, all right. But that again, that view is not just women. I think people in our country have lost their voices. They're afraid of victimization.
Oh, yeah,
They're
that's right.
afraid of being sued. They're afraid of just being treated badly because I share my voice.
Mhm.
And that is something that I would love to see us change, because there was a time when women had their voice in this country. And
Okay, so let's stick to the women, because I think that statement you just made could apply across the board. So I want, because it's in Women's Day, I want to see specifically why you would think, since, because 1995, that I'm using that metaphor that you use, or that is very what you call visceral, and you can see 2 miles to a quarter mile. What could have made change? Could you not see? You see the lack of structured approach. I understand that argument. But could you not see the other reasons why perhaps women may feel that they have achieved a tremendous amount of gender equality, not as much as they would like to, since then, so that they need to go out there, except in specific areas, which do not only apply to women, absolutely not, but that whether the laws that we have, whether the hiring practices that we are seeing, whether the educational, whether those things have had an impact on, if the march was motivated by a sense of inequality, if part of the reason is that to a large extent women do feel that a lot of equality has been, not all, because I know I would consider them, but has been achieved, because I certainly have examples in front of me of that.
So
So
your question is that maybe women have achieved so much that they no longer feel that there is any reason to be an activist. There's no reason as active, so they just back off. All right, and I don't share that at all, because my observation is that I think in our parliament, just 30% of our parliament are women. So that is, we haven't got there. And if we start off by saying that 50% of people who are born are women and 50% are men, okay, it could be 48, 52, whatever, but there's equity in birth, isn't there?
You must ask Paru 10-1.
Well,
go ahead.
That's a whole different story.
That's a mindset, That put a mindset in a woman mind, this. It's 10 women to 1 man, So whether you're looking like a crap or not, thank God for Jesus. Anyway, so you're using the parliament as an example, which is a good example, but I have some figures on that. So go ahead. So
what are the figures you have? Because
what I did, and I did it in a very cursory manner, because I certainly didn't do a deep dive into it. But when I looked at national parliaments around the world, now sometimes the data is not updated sufficiently. But so I just pulled out some figures that I saw as they represent women representations in the national parliaments globally. And Norway is always going to be very good. We know that. I mean, they are high up on the Human Development Index. So they are 48%. Russia, now why that Russia is surprising is because when I started looking at the suffragette movement and the women's movement, it was communism, socialism that really seem to have led the way. They only have 16% representation. St. Lucia has 31%. We have nearly 30%. United States has 28%. Switzerland has 41%. St. Lucia has 11%. South Africa has 46.5%. And Rwanda has over 61%. So I don't know how we going to, I can't do an analysis on that, obviously, because the differences and, culturally and socially, globally are so wide. But United States has 20%. And I think I did mention to you that in India, I want to just focus on us, if you don't mind. But just to answer your question, I did happen to see a news broadcast a few weeks ago where they said they passed legislation in India. And I mentioned to you that at least 30% of the representatives in parliament must be women, because 30% of the population, they're born female. So it only stands to reason.
Yeah.
So in terms of national parliament representation, you have a point. But then you look at who is the Speaker of the House. It's a female. Then you look at our current president of our republic is female, and the one just before her was female. When we look at, we have had a female prime minister. When we look at our commissioner of police, we have a female. I mean, you can't get more macho and masculine if you want to go into machissimo. Commissioner of police is female. So when I looked at it in terms of the politics from that political lens, I saw a movement. And I guess what I'm trying to say, and I did get some data. No, it was Gary Griffith when he was minister. I think he was commissioner of police at the time. And he had said that in 1955, we only had 12 policewomen. He says by 2021, 35% of the 8,000 police officers were women. And he said, and they held, a high percentage of them held enlisted positions. I expect enlisted position means a more high-level position. So when I look at the, although in the defense force, it wasn't looking good, it really didn't, 13.60. But what I'm saying is that when I started looking at the data, and I am data-driven, I'll use one more thing before I stop on that. So, and the reason I'm going to stop there is to give you an opportunity to say whether, because there are a lot of laws that have changed that are very, very, very much in favor of women, very much in favor of women, just because of the socialization and our history of our country. In the next 20 years, it might be a different story, but right now, it favors women. So, just as an example, I looked at the judiciary, because it's three arms of our parliamentary system, right? So you have the parliament, which you just spoke about, the executive, which is there are not many women, and certainly not in very high, I should say high positions, but positions that one would consider critical. But then I look at judiciary, and this is what I found out. I went to the website, so I got it there. There are now 45 judges in the High Court. You know how many of them are women? 30. You know how many? Mm-hmm. 30. Mm-hmm. High Court judges are female. Now, that's because they increased the number of judges in the judiciary. But these hirings are hirings of female. Many of them I taught at law school. Now, when you go to the Court of Appeal, which of course now you have to go up the ladder, it's not the same thing. There are 15 Court of Appeal judges, because they increase the number, 6 of which are female, some of whom I was at school with. So the reason I'm mentioning that figure in particular, and any other figure that I mentioned, is that don't you think that it's just a matter of time you are going to see, because of the fact, just by sheer numbers, that this inequality that we are seeing now, in another 20 years, it might have, in fact, an inequality, and it might be the men who are the ones on the receiving end. I'm asking you that.
And I think you're quite right for a number of reasons that it is emerging. And the main reason that it is emerging is that more women are graduating from university than men. My thought on it, and this is not about data, but my assessment of what is happening is our men are disappearing.
When you say disappearing, what do you mean by that?
Disappearing. They're just not there. They're either being shot. The majority of the murders are men. You agree with that?
Oh, of course, absolutely.
The majority of people in prison are men.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if you consider those who are murdered and those who are in prison, then where are the men for our women? So when you started off by talking about Sparrow saying 10 to 1, he wasn't so wrong, but it's for a very unfortunate, very sad reason. So yes, there may be a transition, but the thing that bothers me about it is that I do not see enough women on boards of directors. And that, to me, that's where the leadership really is. And we're not seeing the women there. And you ask yourself, why are we not seeing
I want you to tell me why you think so.
Why are you not seeing it? Because men appoint their friends. We're still in that situation where a lot of times people look around to who they're familiar with, who they're comfortable with. We don't necessarily use equitable approaches to find people to put into positions. And as a result of that I have written I did something called Contact and Contracts.
Yeah.
And I described it as the CCM, the Contact Contract Mafia. And the thinking behind that was that you needed to have a contact in order to get a contract. And there are a number of people who know all of their friends.
You have to IP that,
I have to IP that. Well, Karen, if I have to IP all the things that I think about, I'm going to spend a lot of time IP.
Make some money, girl. You make money. Don't worry.
I don't know. Money is not my motivation. My motivation is really. So that contact mafia thing that I talked about, while it was in jest, there's a fundamental issue there that when people are looking for someone to fill a post, someone to put on a board, it is a friend or a friend of a friend, and in that case, it's going to take a long time for women, if that continues to be the case, it's going to take a long time for women to be on the boards and for women to be in the leadership. When I look at the banking sector, and I don't have data on this, it's just an observation. When I look at the banking sector,
I'm not going to come in any more data, which is
Karen, I appreciate the data that you're giving me. That is fantastic. That's your thinking, and I appreciate that. Because data, I mean, there are a number of decisions you can't make without data.
Your government doesn't seem to pay to know that. That's true. No, I'm not joking. The IMF in the last report, year after year, no, this is not a joke. I mean, you have to understand, I also come from a different life too, and so I would listen to budgets every single year, and I would hear them repeat that they're going to start the National Statistical Institute, because you cannot manage what you don't measure.
Yeah.
And they constantly every year, and the IMF again this year talked about starting the Statistical Institute. So I'm not making light of it. It is really important, because when I present you with data, argue with it now. Argue with the data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a very interesting point. And it's a very fundamental point that you've just made about decision making without data. And you raised the Statistical Institute, and there was an intention to replace the CSO with a statistical institute. There was a name for it. There was somebody who was appointed as the chairman of that board.
Is that the dragon feel and the sandals that we're supposed to have? Is that what you're talking about? Huh? Is that what you're talking about? Is that the one to be talking about too among them? No, no, Denise. I'm not.
Yes,
Listen,
yes.
I'm not. I am like you. You know. I am
Yeah.
love my country just like you. You know. So you talking about execution and implementation. So
Mhm.
talk is cheap. You know. I could talk and tell
Yes.
you I'll give you anything. You know. But when
Yeah.
I see it, I have to see it happen. And all
Yeah.
I just saying, not to break it up, but they be talking. Economic Advisory Board, poor Doctor. What I don't mean no
Terry Farrell.
Yes, poor man, give up in dismay, right? I mean, you know, just a set of talk, but no action to follow it. No action to follow it. Oh my God, I call it the dragon field in gas field. I call it the dragon field because now the minister should stop talking about the dragon field and Manatee and Lauren, and he's talking about new discussions with BP, like to get us off track about something else that's going to take another 20 years. So, you know, sorry, you know, you see that CSA talk? I went into the CSA office, you know, and they were very nice people, really nice. But if you're underfunded and you're not given the capacity to do the research and the detailed research to guide the government in the decision making, just like how you must do that. If you run in your household, Denise, and you have only $2,000, you can't do a budget, a $2,000 budget, and spending 5,000. They could come look for you. The bailiff coming looking for you.
Okay, you're going down a different road. Yeah,
Okay,
but,
go ahead.
but you raised the point earlier on that the Peter Drucker statement about you can't manage what you cannot measure.
Mhm.
And that is such a significant issue for Trinidad because we need to have a lot more data in order to inform our decision making, about in school, what are we going to do? What are we doing in the schools to make sure that women are protected, are treated in a particular way, that they're not abused? Because oftentimes when we talk about International Women's Day, the first conversation that I hear is domestic violence. But it goes beyond that. That is one part of it. It goes deeper than that. And we need to have a lot more data that will help us make some more decisions about our women, because this country has intelligent women, has women with lots of capacity, but I don't see them. You see a few of them. I don't see enough of them on, in the leadership position. You've just identified the Speaker of the House, you've
I can
identified.
give you I'll give you some in private sector and so on. So I'll balance it because I did go and I did it only this evening. So don't be impressed at all. I said, let me look this up quick. You know what I mean? Because I don't want to say something. I always feel maybe it's the lawyer in me or whatever. You know, where's the evidence? Where's the proof? You know, so I'm so driven by that kind of thing that it tends to make me want to look at something and say, if I make a statement, I want to make sure I can either not back it up or then ask the question why, you know? So I did look at this and I will tell you what it did show, which supports some of it is good, some of it not so good. This came from the Ministry of Labor actually. And this also came from the IDB. IDB, I know, I think it's in 2018, so I might have it. So I'll do the IDB first. They have reported that we in Trinidad and Tobago have a very high percentage of women in managerial positions. They say on average 60%, as opposed to the rest of the region and Latin America, where the average is 30%. When you go to the Ministry of Labor, what they do say, they talk about pay inequality, which of course can't happen in the public sector because it's set by the public sector sort of thing. Is that definitely there's pay inequality in the private sector, and definitely the glass ceiling has not been shattered. It might have a little crack. And the reason, and to support what I just said, I just looked up very quickly. Let me see some of the private sector. So the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturing Association, you did have Trisha Kusal, who was there till 2022, but now Roger Roach is there. But that, I think she was an anomaly. Then I went to Massey Holdings, not one woman. Then I went to Ansa McCall. They had 4,
Karen, Massey's current board or the board under the Angelique Pariseau Potter issue?
Massey.
Massey had two women on the board.
But you see what they did? They broke it up into about 3 divisions of Massey, right? So when it said Massey Holdings,
Yes.
Holdings, it had 4 people.
Yeah.
And Juve Warner was number 1, and the other 3 I can't remember, but they were all men. So there were other groupings, huh? But I'm talking about boards, the main overarching board. And when it came to Ansa McCall Holdings, 4 to the 13 board members of the holding company are female. But so what what the Minister of Labor, the minister has said, what's his name again? I don't mean any disrespect to him, but what's his name?
He's from La Brea. I know he's from La Brea. I can't remember his name.
He worse than me, you know.
He is so quiet. We don't even know his name.
McClatchy? Is his name McClatchy?
Yes, Mr. McClatchy.
Oh God, be glad. Anyhow, what he did say was this. He did say that there are, whilst women are rising in managerial, because you can't help that, because 70% of enrollments in the university are female. And that's not only in here, it's all over the world. And it's not only female enrollment, but in fields that were dominated by men. I think more women are doctors than are men now. And engineers, they may be equal. Actuaries, all the fields that were male dominated now are either equally, in terms of numbers of men to women, either equal or near equal. But he did say that when it came to the public sector, most of the permanent secretaries and deputy permanent secretaries are female, and that's the highest rate you can reach in the public service. But he did say that in the private sector, not so much. He said in the private sector, on average, and I think somebody else did a study on it, 2 people did a study on it. They said on the boards, 1 in 5 on average of the board members is female. And I just happened to look up these ones, so that there's no reflection on thing, but I just said on average, huh? It said 1 in 5, but it's and I want to ask you this then. You say no, because it flows maybe my Pollyanna outlook. It may be affected by that Pollyanna outlook. Do you think that part of the reason that the boards continue to be populated with men is because of don't forget the word I'm going to use, the old boys network. The old boys network. These are the guys who went St. Mary's and Fatima and Kouassi together, who hang out at Union Club, which is all male, it goes down, by the way, go down to cricket wicket thing, lying together, and they say most deals are made not in the boardroom but outside the boardroom, hang out with each other, hang out with these children, have similar values, similar outlooks in life. Do you think that networking that you're talking about is at a large extent fueled by that old boys network? And if I say old boys network, you know what happened to the old boys? What happened to the old boys? Guess what happened to them old boys? Well, they call it for long, No, but if it's the old boy, no, but if these are being fueled, it's called, that is a race that is recognized. So, and that comes from going to, and then you notice a high school, I don't talk university, or primary school, I talk in St. Mary's, Fatima, they love to call them, and these schools, right? Yeah. And they go to each other's homes, they know each other's families. And so they have a camaraderie, they have an understanding, they have a way of looking. And they think that you don't want to bring a woman inside here to interfere with how we look at things. Okay, let them manage things, but don't bring them inside the boardroom and want to make too much policy and interfere with how we do things. Now, if that is so, the same transition I am speaking about in the judiciary, which is unbelievable, right? The same transition you're seeing there. Don't you think at some point in time that and other factors may change the composition in the private sector of the boards, or do you think it's going to continue nonetheless?
I think it's going to be a very gradual change. And that is one of the problems of our country, and not just our country, when decisions are made only by men, and there are studies that talk about that, when decisions are made only by men, there's a perspective that is not necessarily supportive of the entire society because it's a male perspective. What is needed is far more collaboration so that you do have a female perspective in the big decision making as well. And for us to do that, it's going to be a very gradual transition, because you've just talked about the Old Boys Network, which is clear that Old Boys Network continues to function.
Alive and well.
It's alive and well. And what is even worse, and again, this is from some of my experiences, is when you are in a situation in which men are making decisions, they kind of expect women to just hush. They don't expect you to give your point of view. And those women who, well, my experience has been, whenever I have given my point of view on, serious issues, I've had to be really aggressive, almost, to get people to just listen, So there has to be a transformation of our leadership attitude, and it has to be a transformation that accepts some bit of equity, that understands that women have a point of view as well, and that other people have a point of view. Because I'm also very supportive of inclusion approaches, because we cannot continue to just have people out on the side. We need to really embrace what is now being described as DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We need to embrace that, because that's humanity. If we continue to just have a male point of view on it and male-dominated decision-making, then that is not a humanitarian approach. That is an approach that is just very unfortunate. And we're going to continue to not make the right kinds of transitions.
So I'm going to ask you too now I know I'm genuinely I would ask you, you said, like, because we're talking about both, because I think there are many examples which I could speak to, because of course, as I said, I spent a lot of my time in academia, and I wrote books on family law and areas that would have touched female rights, indirectly or otherwise. Okay, so what I really am asking is, what is a female's point of view? And before you answer that, because you need to say that female's point of view. So what is that female's point of view? Because it doesn't help. And I just talk in the facts, I don't make up anything. I don't make it. I just, based on even what you say, is it helpful when your prime minister, your leader, makes things like, you must know how to mow the lawn. You must mow the lawn so, and then mow it so, and mow it so. Talking a thing, and something about buying underwear for his wife, and then talking about, I can't tell you, when domestic violence is a serious subject, see, I can't tell you what man to put in your bed. So, I mean, that's not very helpful from a point of view of, I see Dr. Hussain joining us almost to the minute of being on time. So let me answer the question. What do you mean by that? And then I will introduce our subject matter expert, Dr. Hussain.
Yes. So before you ladies continue, let me just tell you that she'll be on via audio only.
Okay.
I sent you.
You'll be able to see her beautiful face.
I sent you a picture of her. Can we put it up?
You sent it to me?
Well, okay.
Okay.
I emailed it, but I can put it in the chat if you wish.
See, you'll start talking and talk. You start to lose it. No, you know what a male point of view and a female point of view now.
All right.
But before we get into Dr. Hussain, I just want to ask you what you really meant by that. Would we have a Ukraine-Russia war if women were in charge?
Decisions and our suggestions come from our life experiences. And the life experience of a man is very different to the life experience of a woman. So that's the point I'm making. I'm not saying that biologically it makes a difference.
understand
Your
that.
decisions are based on your culture and your socialization. So you
So
have
give
a
me
very
an example. So give me an example how you could see that playing out. Because really for me to understand
so,
how to be.
so for example, a decision that will be made about working from home.
No,
A lot
okay.
of men may take a position on that no,
Mhm.
we're not working from home because of
Mhm.
whatever. But you may have
Yeah,
a woman who is going to make that kind of decision, who will look at,
yeah.
okay, so if I'm working from home, what else can I do?
Mhm.
How else can I do it?
Mhm.
Can I
That's
take
a
care of?
very good point.
The
Very good
decision
point.
making, your decision making is
Very,
based
very
on
good point.
culture, your socialization, and your
Very good point.
education.
And your
Those are
life
the,
experience.
yeah, and
Very,
your
very
whole
good.
life experience. Yes,
Very,
yes.
very good. I just before I hold on, turn on to Dr. Hussain, introduce Dr. Hussain to the audience. I do remember this one thing. When I went to interview at the law school many, many moons ago, it was a male panel. And I never forgot the question because I said, what has that got to do with anything? No, I found it a very strange question. What does my husband do? And what is his position? I said, what does that have to do with you employing me and paying me a salary? It came across to me very, very clearly, I will tell you, as if they were using, if my husband had a good job and was making money, they would take that into account to how much they, in the band, there's a band, the band in which they would offer me. They did not say that to me. I had never thought about it before. But when that was said to me, I found it such a peculiar question. And I said to myself, they want to know how much my husband is making, so they want to know how much they could offer me based on if she's in a good position or a bad position. So that I just thought I would share with the gender inequality. But Dr. Hussain, you're being very, very patient. So let me introduce you to the audience, to whom you are not a stranger, although we don't have your beautiful face showing up on the screen. But I do have a little background on you, as many people already do know you. I certainly know you from before, from on other shows. You're a senior lecturer at the University of the West Indies in undergraduate studies. You're coordinator and co-executive editor. And I don't know what I didn't know what IGDS stood for, so you will help me with that. You have your BA. You're laughing at me, Denise. But I have a BA in political science from the University of Toronto, an MPhil in gender and development studies from UWI, a PhD in anthropology from University College London, and your research is really centered on politics and women's leadership and Indo-Caribbean feminism, masculinities, gender-based violence. You have also been a lecturer and head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies. You write a weekly blog for one of our daily newspapers, and you involved in the Caribbean feminist movement for over 25 years. So there's no question that you are well placed to add to our discussion. And there were some questions actually that Denise shot at me, which I was very happy for her to give me and to help that discussion. And one of the questions she asked, and I'll ask you two or three, and you can just go with it. You don't have to. I won't break you in your thing. The difference between gender equality and equity. Then a question that also came up was gender equity is God, I can't even read my own handwriting. More, anyway, becoming more something. I mean, more stress, I don't know. And then if you had the power, what would you do? And what would you do to change things? So I just want a discussion from your point of view, gender equity, gender equality. How do we see that played out in Trinidad and Tobago? How can we make a difference? And what would you do? And you have the floor. And thank you for joining us.
Hi,
Not
good
seeing it.
afternoon, and
Yeah.
you both.
Good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon to you both, and good afternoon
Thank
to your
you.
listeners. And thank you so much for inviting me to be with you this afternoon. Which question would you like to start with?
You choose whichever one. I
Maybe,
mean,
maybe you could start with just having a conversation about IG in IGD. Oh gosh, yeah, I'm not forgetting what it was.
The
Good.
IGDS.
Yes, yes.
Well, the population should be very proud of the IGDS, or the Institute for Gender and Development Studies. We
Okay.
are a 30-year-old feminist institute established in the global south. And we teach undergraduate courses, graduate courses. We're involved in research. We're also involved in an extensive amount of outreach in the true tradition of Caribbean public intellectuals. And so, a good example of our work is the Blue Teddy campaign, which was initiated by Professor Rhoda Reddock and Professor Sandra Reed. And when I talk to students in high schools, so many of them recognize the Blue Teddy symbol, a symbol to for the campaign to end child sexual abuse and incest. And I say to them, this is a good example of what this little department, bringing its research, bringing its intention to highlight issues of violence that have remained stigmatized and silenced, and adding all of that with a desire to transform the Caribbean. And this Blue Teddy symbol is a good example of that. So the IGDS has been doing this work across many different areas, including masculinities, including the environment, for decades. And I think it is money well spent by the population and by the state. And it's helping to create a new generation of progressive young thinkers.
So Denise, I'm gonna let you take over from now, co-host. You ask all the questions. You shoot the
Thank
question.
you very much. Thank you very much, Karen. And Karen will pop in at any time that she
Nice.
wishes to. Gabby, thank you very much for being with us.
My
And
pleasure.
one of the issues that has been on my mind is trying to understand how the International Women's Day March moved from 2 miles of women to about quarter mile of women. What do you think is responsible for that?
Well, first of all, again, things for the population to know. The first International Women's Day March was held in the world, or the first International Women's Day gathering was held around 1908 or so. And it was founded by socialist women who had a concern with the conditions of women who were seamstresses and women who were working, laboring women, the conditions in which they worked and the pay that they received and so on. So International Women's Day has historically been grounded in a concern with the lives of ordinary women who are trying to make a living in conditions that may be unfair, exploitative, underpaid, and so on. And I'm going to come back to why that's important. In 1961, Christina Lewis started the first International Women's Day March in Trinidad and Tobago in San Fernando, for those of you who are San Fernando South people, in San Fernando. And then over the decades, it was maintained by the network of NGOs for Trinidad and Tobago for the advancement of women and the legendary Hazel Brown, as well as the Caribbean Association for Feminist Research and Action, and many other organizations, Working Women, Women Working for Social Progress, many others. And in the 1990s, again, this is very important, the 1990s was a real moment of mass organizing globally. There was the last global women's conference that was held, and in place in the government was Joan Yule Williams. And Joan Yule Williams was very supportive of the women's movement. And this is why it's important. I came in where you all were discussing women and leadership. And I'll tell you, mass movements are absolutely crucial. I believe, and I don't mean mass movements of bourgeois and elite people or well-educated like people like me. I mean mass movements of ordinary people who are saying we are not supporting these conditions of water deprivation we're living in. We have issues with food prices. What is happening with the unaffordability of housing? Our employment. We are a union of unemployed people who are demanding better conditions in the labor market and so on. So mass mobilizing is very important, but leadership is absolutely crucial. Leadership can make or break moments. And so Joan Yule Williams was there in the 1990s and was very supportive of the Caribbean being well represented at the Beijing meeting. Beijing is in China. Global Women's Conference. Now, I say all of that because when Joan Yule Williams came in, she would get the police women involved, and she would get all of these. She would bus in women from all over, and they would all be marching. And there was a way that the state was showing, at minimum, an investment in the women's movement. In a way, we're not seeing the state coming out and saying we have this investment in bringing women together across all sectors, and we see this as our responsibility now. That's the first thing. As the march continued to be organized over decades, and I went to my first International Women's Day march in Port of Spain in 1995 or so. I was very young, and I just thought this was the most amazing thing ever. And so over the decades, there was really a need for a younger generation to revitalize the International Women's Day March. And so we began to contribute to that around 2016, building on this long, long, long legacy of women's labor to raise women's issues and so on. What we were able to do in the last decade or so was little less than a decade, was to bring in a younger generation, UE students, teenagers, secondary school students. And what I love about young people is that their politics is 50,000 miles ahead of people who are of a past generation. Like I think this is, we have a prime minister that's in his 70s, and we have a younger generation whose politics are extremely progressive, and we can see the disconnect between the two. And I think this is important. People are all talking about age and leadership around the world. Anyway, so I think that revitalization is what openness is what led to a younger generation taking part. Now, Denise, you asked what led to a smaller march this year. And I think there are many considerations. In the first place, as I outlined, there was a level of political leadership that supported something like the march, not in a politicized way, not making it a PNM or UNC thing, but recognizing that the state was interested in showing its support for women's rights. And I think we see some of that now, but not in this way. And second, I think that we on the ground need to, certainly in Caribbean feminism, and Caribbean feminism has always been committed to the women oppressed, but I think we need to revitalize going out to communities, connecting with the issues that our communities are facing, and inviting communities to bring their issues to the march in a way that makes them feel as if this is going to help to bring them mobilizing and solidarity. So I'll give you an example. Lack of access to water. We see the newspapers. People are complaining about not getting water for weeks and months. Lack of access to water is a feminist issue. And it is a feminist issue.
Why is it? Yeah, sorry.
It is a feminist issue because it affects the lives of children, it affects the lives of families, and it particularly affects the lives of women who are primarily responsible for things like cooking and washing. But it also makes children's life much harder, it makes family life much harder, and it is also a deprivation of a basic right. And that is why it is a feminist issue. Similarly, we can look at the high price of housing and the fact that how difficult it is for people to own their own homes. This too is a feminist issue because it means that people are living in precarious situations on rental incomes. And in the pandemic, when people lost their incomes, we saw what happened. We saw how families had to move into other places because they couldn't afford to pay their rents anymore, and so on. And so I think it's a reminder to us, Denise, to end this very long historical answer to your question. But I think this is a call to us to connect with people such that they feel that it is important to bring their issues into this space, and to know that this is a space where it will be affirmed and it will be amplified, and it will help build momentum for what they are struggling with when they go back home.
Thank you very much, Gabby. And Gabby, you're going to be talking for the rest of the hour, huh?
I want to ask you something, but you ask questions, Denise. I want you to take the lead. I want you to take the lead on this because I have a little different take on
this. Yes.
yes. So I
Okay.
want you to take the lead on this.
A
And
couple of
then
things, Gabby. I think we met in 1995 at that march. I think that's the first time we met each other.
Yeah.
And the relationship went up and down, but that's where I remember you. Gabby, when people talk about IGDS, they tend to think that it's only women that you are focusing on. Is that true?
Oh, no, not at all. The Institute for Gender and Development Studies has been conducting research on men and masculinity since 1996. I've been teaching a course, but a course was introduced on men and masculinities since 2004. I've been by Professor Rhoda Reddock. I've been teaching it since 2005, and we have produced extensive research on men and masculinities in Trinidad and Tobago. We've supervised students. I've supervised a number of students. I can be very proud of saying that Mr. Amilka Sanatan, who is now located in the gender division, was my MPhil student. We supervised theses on men in prisons, men in fatherhood, men and feminist or men and mobilizing against gender-based violence, or how participated in the feminist movement to end gender-based violence. In fact, I've just completed collecting data on men across the Caribbean, a very small but deeply qualitative sample on speaking to men about their journeys into gender-based violence prevention, what led them to enter this work.
you know,
Is
I
Gabby?
despair. Yes, back there.
And to
No,
advocate for the issues faced by men and boys to be addressed.
okay, let me ask you something, because I wouldn't want the show to end without me asking it and then leaving it to you and Denise to discuss it. I guess, again, my background, I think I'm a more, that I personally have never experienced gender or been aware if it was there, gender inequality, mainly because wherever I worked, the heads of the institutions were female. And then when I was in government, I never was aware of that my gender mattered. What mattered is my performance. And my PS, who was the top PS in the government, Alison Lewis, was female. So I personally didn't have any experience of it. But what I wanted to ask you, because you did say it's also masculinity, there's been so many, maybe that miles has cut down so much because you're seeing, for example, Status of Children Act. Before, a woman who had a child who was not married to the man, and he left no will, that child got nothing. But now that child of that woman, because it's still more a male-oriented world we're living in. When you're looking at issues of when someone dies and they leave no will, the common law spouse, and there's a definition in the legislation, they are entitled to as much as if he were married to her, unless he in fact died with a lawful spouse, in which case she still is entitled to receive something. When we look at the issue of domestic violence, I saw them quote some figures, but I don't know if there's been an amendment, but I went and looked up to 2018. And when you look at that, they do not recognize male-on-male intimate partner violence and the financial abuse, a number of things they do recognize. So when they give you statistics that say 44% of women experience domestic violence, maybe it's because not included in those figures because of our legislation, men and male relationships are not recognized as they should. Equal opportunity legislation that makes it clear that you have to you cannot discriminate based on gender. They had something called spousal rape, where a man could not be guilty of rape. They amended the Offenses Against the Persons Act to clearly say that there is something called spousal rape. So what I am saying, both in terms of property rights when someone dies, from particularly woman's point of view, Even if he leaves a will and he leaves nothing for you, you could go to the court and go for family provision and say, listen, I'm someone who he should have made provision for. So there's so much legislation, in my respectful opinion, that is so much, has done so much to equalize the position of women in terms of rights, that I wonder, and I'm really asking the question. I'm truly asking the question because sometimes I think when people hear the word feminist, I'm not saying I'm not one of them, but when some people hear the word feminist or hear that language, they tend to get turned off. I say, oh God, such a woman who man-hating woman, them have something against man and what's wrong with them, and and it sort of, instead of bringing them to the table, it just seems to push them away. So I would like to know, in your view, if there have been a lot of strides made, and what has to still to be done, both from you and Denise, and I'm not seeing anything more.
I think that's a really good question, and it does reflect a lot of what people think. And I think a lot of strides have been made. And for that, we have to credit the labor of women, right? Just like with any movement, by the time something hits the mainstream and becomes acceptable, it reflects decades and decades of advocacy, whether it's around issues of disability or any issue. So there have been decades and decades of labor being put in that I think have resulted in some of the gains that we want to see. Um, I want to answer your question by first pointing to two very quick issues, but then also pointing you a little beyond that. And in a world in which there is true gender equality, I'll just give an example, there would be no sexual violence against women. So let's just start there. Let's just start with the reality that women of all ages are terrified of sexual violence, whether in their homes, on the street, in their workplaces, or anywhere else, getting into their car, and they are terrified 24 hours a day. And so when we live in a world in which women are not terrified of sexual violence, that is, of one sex being violent towards them because of their sex, because they are women. This is not random anybody. This is because they are women. Then we can begin to talk about gender equality existing. But as long as we live in a world in which one sex is targeting another sex because of who they are, we cannot in any way. I mean, you can have as many degrees as you want. You can be the best PS in the world. You can even be a prime minister. But if you are a woman, you know that you are at risk of being raped or sexually assaulted. Should anyone break into your home? Should you be in the wrong place at any time? And you are at risk from birth, from 1 year old until death, whether you are 70 years old. And we know this from the data. So I think we have to start there, right? As they say, as feminists have long said, when we live in a world where a woman is not sexually violated for 1 day out of the year, 1 day, we can begin to talk. Until then, we need to dress back a little bit and say, we have fought, we have gained, but we most certainly have not even hit the basics of where we should be. So I just want to start there. But you did raise, I think you raised your opening was really great, which is to say that in your experience, these were your experiences. And so much of us start with our own experiences in understanding the world. And I'll tell you what I tell my students. When you're thinking about gender, you have to think about 4 levels. The first level is what I call the ideological, or the level of our beliefs and values. What are our beliefs and values? Do we still believe, for example, that if she could end up stabbed to death in front of a daycare or a school? Do we still hold beliefs that allow these kinds of things to happen? So the first is the ideological. What are our beliefs and values? Are thinking about the way that those are changing, but they are also resilient. The second level is what I call the institutional. So the first was the ideological, the second was the institutional. The institutional refers to things like the state and law, which you just pointed to, also refers to religion, family, schooling, the labor market. I might be missing out one. the education system. Now, I'll tell you something. If you look at each of those institutions, the states and law versus the family versus religion versus education, each of them, just as examples, or even media, will tell you a different story about what is happening with gender relations. And so it's important that we don't just look at one of them to get the whole picture, because what we might be seeing when we look at religion, which remains extremely patriarchal, right? Except for maybe some religions, highly patriarchal still in many ways. If we look at education, we get a story that's very popular to people that girls are doing well, girls are doing well. Okay. If we look at the labor market, we see women are not doing well in the labor market. So it's important for us to keep in mind that if we look at what's happening across these institutions, family, labor, schooling, the state, the labor market, the media, and so on, we're going to get a contradictory picture. And to allow those contradictions to exist because they are in fact the reality. So we can't just be like, as oh God, Tony Lee, one International Women's Day, asked me, Dr. Hussain, haven't women gotten all they wanted? I'm like, really, Tony, really? Okay. But maybe we don't want to be so reductionist. Maybe we want to have the conversation about the contradictions. That's the institutional. Then there is the interpersonal. Now, the interpersonal is the level at which most of us deal. We're like, well, if you're a man, you're like, well, my boss is a woman. And, how is it that I'm so powerful when she is, more powerful than me? Or my wife controls everything. So you're all talking about patriarchy and so on. We often deal at the level of the interpersonal, but the interpersonal is also the anecdotal, meaning it refers to us, but it may not in fact be generalizable. So, and I'll give you a concrete example. When men are talking about their experiences of domestic violence, they are often, so women are talking about violence, all these forms of violence, and men go, yes, but what about women being violent to men? And men are often talking about the interpersonal, that level of relationships where women fight or fight back or maybe violent. But that level of the interpersonal cannot be extrapolated across the institutional because it doesn't refer to the institutional. It refers to what's happening in one institution, the family. It doesn't speak to sex stereotyping that happens in media. Every stag ad, every Carib ad, all the ads with women with tiles, right? But they're half naked next to the tile or the tire. We're not talking about the media or other institutions. So very often women are talking across institutions about hierarchy, inequality, violence, and so on. And very often people are only talking about the interpersonal, that level that they feel and know. And that's why men in the men's rights movement so often devalue women talking about patriarchy. In their interpersonal experience, they may experience women as very powerful and possibly even abusive. And so for that, them is all the story, but it's not. And then finally, the fourth level. So we did the ideological, institutional, interpersonal. The fourth level is the individual. How does an individual feel about themselves? Now, let me end by saying this. Many men have, this is just a fact, men have ideological and institutional power. That is, we still believe in male headship. We have a parliament that is predominantly male, even though everybody and their granny has been talking about how women have dominated education for 20 or 30 years, meaning women have more qualifications in this country than men, and yet they are a minority in parliament and nobody is rioting about it, except for me, who I keep trying to encourage my students to do it. But they're not going to, so everybody could stay calm. But the point is that men's leadership, men's headship is so normalized that when they're men-only boards, we don't notice there's a male-only parliament, despite women having more qualifications, because we've all been talking about it for 20 years, right? We've been talking about university graduates. They are more qualified. Where are they? Male headship has become so normal, unnoticeable. So men have ideological power and they have institutional power. They're at the head of business, they're at the head of state, right? Gender stereotypes that show, what's that sexy man from Aquaman name? Right?
Momoa?
Yes, right. They show the idea of the Schwarzenegger Rambo ideal. Women are ideal of the loving, soft, gentle, right? So men
True.
don't institutionally, even if women may be doing well in some of those spheres across all institutions, if you add it up, even in the household, men are considered to be the head, women are considered to be the neck. Ideologically, patriarchal values still hold. Institutionally, male headship remains. But, and here's the thing, even though men have ideological and institutional power, that does not mean they feel personally powerful. And in fact, many men go around going, but I don't feel personally powerful. Look how powerful my wife is, my boss, my colleagues, all of these women, these feminists, they're so powerful. I don't feel personally powerful. And they themselves, as a man, may not be walking around feeling like I have or I am powerful either. So at the individual, men are not walking around feeling like they're wielding all this power that they apparently have. And that leads them to think and perhaps to act as if patriarchy is not real, right? It is, because it doesn't feel real to them, but it is true. Women, on the other hand, do not have ideological power, right? We're fighting to get up there, but the ideal, the global ideal, the ideal that trillions of dollars are spent on, right? The ideal that gives people status and power is violence. And women are not fundamentally associated with violence. That's gang leaders, political leaders, military leaders. In an election, you're beating them, the East and the West and the North and the South. What a horrendous thing to say to a population, but that violence is what is idealized. So women do not
Gabby,
stereotypes, the state, and so on, religion, and yet, women exercise interpersonal power. You know why? You know why women fight with men and men think that women are violent to them? Because the interpersonal is the only place that women can resist. The interpersonal is the only place where they can exercise that kind of power, because anything else requires taking on a system. And the only women who are going to take on the system are feminists or women working collectively. And that is a major undertaking in a world that demonizes those women. Right? So what are women going to do? They're going to negotiate at the interpersonal. They're going to fight at the interpersonal. They're going to try and exercise power at the interpersonal in their relationships, in their families, in their workplaces. And then individually, we are not walking around feeling like victims, feeling like we are capable, we are powerful, we are good, we are good people and good citizens. So even though women may be personally feeling powerful, and exercising interpersonal power does not mean that they have ideological or institutional power. And so this is a contradiction that most people miss. And that's why anytime anyone is talking about gender, you must always think about it at these four levels. What are the dominant beliefs and values? What are the institutions and the power relations that remain? What are the interpersonal relations where a lot of renegotiation is actually happening? And how are individual women and men themselves either reproducing these values or challenging them in their own identities? And we really need to have a complex analysis that allows for contradictions. So I
Denise,
just
you take
wanted to
over
say
from
that
there.
because you started
I
with
want
your own
you to say,
personal
you
experience,
take it from there, Denise.
Gabby, that has been such a brilliant kind of, I've almost felt as if I was in a lecture.
Yeah,
And
a good one, though, eh? A good one, though, eh?
very good one. I was
You
awake.
weren't falling asleep, right?
Gabby, there's another issue. I just want to transition a little because a lot of people ask me, what's the difference between gender equality and gender equity? What are you all talking about? Aren't women equal? Aren't women getting everything that they want? So could we talk a little about that distinction between equity and equality?
Sure. So gender equity refers to doing things that create greater fairness. So for example, let's take parental leave. We all agree that men should have more than 4 days parental leave, right? Because men are nurturers, just like women. Human beings are nurturers. But if we're giving women and men parental leave, maternity leave and paternity leave, women's maternity leave should take into account that they've just given birth and that they are also probably breastfeeding, or we certainly want them to. So very often you give women greater maternity leave so they can physically recover from the birth, in addition to having time with the baby, even while you should give men enough parental leave for them to also play a role, a nurturing role, and also contribute in terms of labor. So that's just one example. Another example is in some countries, for example, they have special buses or special train cars for women only ones. Again, reflecting on the levels of fear that women have in our society. So, a good way to think about it is equality is putting up a wall and telling everybody has an equal right to look over the wall. The wall is one height, it is not discriminating against anybody. But equity is recognizing that some have a disability and therefore will require something that allows them to see the wall. Or maybe they're just short and small like me. And maybe that's just an example, and they require something to stand on. Or maybe they're elderly and so they need something that again helps them to maintain, an ability to. So equity is when you provide supports for people who by themselves cannot see over the wall for one reason or another, or maybe the wall is set at a height that doesn't match everybody's capacities, and so you provide them with it has to do with responding to people's needs fairly, not just providing a blanket response and assuming that that is going to address historical and structural imbalances, or indeed biological differences or any other kind that prevents people from equally participating.
Let me ask you something. And this is
I invite
actually
the
a
whole country to
personal.
come to my classes. They're super fun.
Look, we having a class right now, this is class 101. And listen, we taking notes. And you're a real teacher, institutional, interpersonal. What is for and what is for? All right.
Ideological.
Huh?
Ideological.
Okay, now the interpersonal one, this is what I want to ask you. This is the question I really want to ask you. I may be wrong, and it's just a thought, and I like you and Denise to answer, because I think you're much better able to do that than I. Do you think that men feel to a certain extent emasculated? Now, men traditionally, for thousands of years, and you still see it being played out in Asian and African countries still, and you talk about religion, you mentioned the patriarchy and religion. It's true. I go to church in my, in my whatever church I belong to, Roman Catholic Church. I have to say that because 80% of the people there are women or with little children, but it's always a priest. I never understand that. I never understand why the priest has to be a man when 80% of the congregation is female. It's the woman holding up the church. I never understand why it is that when we talk about morality or criminality, the prisons are filled with men for whatever reason it happened. But when you look how many women are in prison, if you want to use a moral argument, which is what religion has, I can't understand why not that happening. But the question I really want to ask you, because it does bother me, and both of you could answer it for me, because do you feel to some extent that the men are feeling threatened by the progress that women have? Because there's been a transactional relationship between men and women, whether it was ever stated or otherwise. For your youth and beauty, in exchange for that, you will get my power and money. And that's fair exchange. I could be ugly, I could be short, I could be fat, I could be balding, I could be old, but I am giving you power, money, status, and in exchange, you will give me your beauty and your youth. And when that beautiful, youthful woman who we wanted to put into a box is no longer willing to stay in the box, but is winning in national scholars. I mean, I know some of them I said personally, and national scholar, brilliant. Do you think that sort of thing creates within men a threat to their own sense of self and masculinity in this world, and that is partly why we're seeing so much of the domestic violence, which is not just physical, it's financial abuse, it's stalking. If you look at the legislation, there's a lot of in the definition of what it is. Do you think that's playing any part that men feel emasculated because the tables are slowly turning against them, and that fiction is being actually exposed to be what it is? Both Denise, Gabrielle, you all know the answer. I don't have the answer to that, I just want to know. I am the audience.
So
Karen,
I have to apologize to you all. I think I've been breaking up. So my apologies for that, and to your listeners. I think definitely men are feeling emasculated by the challenge to and transformation of traditional power relations. And that's not unusual. Any group in power who has had power is going to feel threatened by a changing or a challenge to that power. I don't think it's up to women to be intimidated by those feelings of emasculation or any less committed to achieving their goals for an equitable, sustainable, and peaceful world. I think those issues need to be talked through, but we certainly should not be held back by them. So what should be happening now? The fact is that there's great work we should be doing on transforming the expectations that boys and men face and transforming the ideals of masculinity, starting with when children are very small. So that, and it is happening. We know that a younger generation of boys and men does have changed views from an older generation. So that is happening. Um, men's feeling of emasculation comes back to what I talked about. They have an expectation of being in power and women playing a particular role. And then when women don't stay in their place, what does that mean for how they identify themselves? So as one schoolboy said to me once, but miss, if I'm not a protector, what am I? So in a way, when women challenge those roles, masculinity needs to redefine itself. But redefining yourself requires a lot of courage and requires going into the unknown. And for men, that can be very difficult because the most important thing about a man is that others recognize his masculinity. We as women, we don't have those kinds of challenges. If we lose our job, we don't feel like we've lost our femininity. If a man loses his job because of the breadwinner ideal, he feels as if he's been emasculated. And men are often blaming women for the emasculation that they feel. But actually, where we should be turning our lens is to the deterioration of our economies in the Caribbean over the past 30 years from the 1980s, which has made it much more difficult for men to earn a living wage in the legal labor market and to meet those masculine ideals. And this has been traced all over the world, where economies have contracted, just like with race, where countries are contracting economically, they turn against migrants and they turn against others who are seen to be the cause of the problem. But actually, it has to do with an inability to fulfill those roles in a way that one once was able to. So I think these are issues worth talking about. I do not think that women should be held intimidated by them, and I encourage men to have those, to get on, get in the movement and be having these conversations about how, instead of feeling emasculated, what can we do so that, because you want men to believe in justice. You don't want the male view to be a view that's always going to be regressive. What's that? You want the men to be, and masculinity to be invested in justice, in care, in peace, and in human rights. That's the kind of masculinity we want, masculinity. So I think this is about continuing the conversation, but encouraging men to see themselves as having both a role and a responsibility for being a part of it. But one thing I want to say, in the Caribbean, it is very important for us to challenge this idea that women were dependent on men. African and Indian women who came to the Caribbean came as independent workers, whether they were enslaved or whether they were indentured. They did not come as wives. And so the myth that women from time immemorial in the Caribbean have been dependent on men and housewives is a fiction. And we must credit our history of having women working in the Caribbean under hugely exploitative and violent conditions. But women have worked here since the beginning of the plantation economy. And also, the breadwinner ideal is also a myth. So even if men believe that they should be providing income, and so do women, we have a long history in the Caribbean of men not doing that. And in fact, women being both the carers and the breadwinners. So we need to be really careful about grounding our analyses of what's happening in a way that also affirms the gender relations that have defined our own history.
Denise, I want to hear co-host.
I can't
Co-host,
add
co-host. You can't let me down. You can't let me down, co-host.
I have nothing to add to what Gabby has just said. But there's a question that I want to bring to Gabby, and that's a question of what are the structures that are needed to support what we've just been talking about? What are the structural changes that we need to make?
Well, I think Karen pointed to some, there's so many. I think all of those legislative changes are really important. I think recognizing that leadership is core to transforming inequities of all kinds, I think that in terms of structures as well, we need to recognize that each of those institutional domains, religion, family, schooling, the labor market, each of them requires looking at where are the inequities and then using things like state institutions, with the support of NGOs, with the backing of regular people demanding this change, but demanding accountability for them shifting. I'll give you a small example, really small example. When we are building sidewalks, right? First of all, we don't have a transportation policy that is engendered, which is bizarre, right? That we would have no transportation policy that understands how women and men differently use transport and are differently vulnerable in the context of public transportation.
Can I ask you that before you go ahead? How do they use it differently?
Well, for women own cars a much lesser degree than men. So women are much greater users of public transportation everywhere in the world. Women are greater users of public transportation in the first place. So public transportation is a feminist issue, not just because it affects women, but because it reflects these gender differences in how our society is organized. Secondly, women are vulnerable in the context of public way that men are not. And the fact that state institutions like the Ministry of Transportation have not taken this seriously, despite what we know happened to Andrea Barrett, despite what we know happened to so many others, is shocking. So you asked about the institutions, Denise, but in so many ways, the structures are there. It's just that the public has to be prepared to hold those who govern those institutions accountable for doing better in a way that actually meets the public needs. And of course, we are doing that. We're begging for water all the time. We're begging for schools to open all the time. We are constantly protesting, begging, potholes, but somehow it ends up being politicized. So it becomes about an MP or a minister or somebody rescuing you, not the failure of the organization itself and how that organization can show its improvement over time. And that's our desperation, number one. So we go to the individual. And two, it's the governor mode. The governor mode is everything goes to the top, to the governor for solution, instead of looking at what's happening in these state institutions, what's happening in town and country planning, what's happening in the institutions that are meant to protect us. Karen, you asked how else, how is transportation? Sidewalks are a feminist issue because have you ever seen mothers try to get anywhere? In other countries, they can use a stroller. In Trinidad and Tobago, you have one child in your arms, a school bag on your back, a handbag, a lunch kit, and you're carrying everything. And that is because the sidewalks are simply not built for mothers with children.
This conversation is so brilliant. I think Denise knows a lot of what you're saying already, but for me, it has been an eye-opener because for not one moment would I have thought of potholes, pavements, water, and transportation from a gender focus and in a real way, not in not in a, because I'm not, I tend to be a little bit I'm pragmatic, a little bit too much for my own good. But you talking today, Dr. Hussain, listening to you and hearing you explain why those issues, even Denise, you were talking earlier on when I asked you, and maybe you could want to say a little bit more. I mean, about working from home, because men still think they're helping you. No, I know that's not your story, eh? You have a nice, yeah, not your story. You write a book that say that, that say, so we're not making it about interpersonal you. But, a lot of it is, if it is a woman really were in charge, I think people would understand the pressure a woman is under to get that child ready for school. And it's like, if whatever the husband doing, he may dropping up to school. But the pressure of the homework, the extra lessons, it feels like most of that pressure is put on the woman. And I think if there were more women in charge, there would be more understanding that work can be done from home, not only because it saves money or all the other things that men may think are good reasons why, but they would also see it from a gender position where everybody wins. What do you say to that, Denise and Gabrielle, as we have a few more minutes left? And I don't know if anybody can call because there's not much time left, but Denise and Gabrielle, Dr. Hussain, you all take it there. We have 9 minutes. What do you all think? I mean, it's been an eye-opener for me. I'm genuine about that. I'm genuine about saying that.
I want to say that where women are performing the care roles, we can point to women experiencing the disadvantages, but where men are performing the same nurturing and caring roles as women, getting the children ready, having to take them to school, whatever, then it expands our focus to look at, yes, we focus on women because they are performing those roles, but actually, if we look at what's happening to who is performing the care work, then we are able to broaden that lens and can look at whether or not it's women or men doing it. So whether or not it's women or men doing it, somebody is having to get a baby to daycare because they have to work and cannot use a stroller on any sidewalk in Trinidad and Tobago, for example, right? And it could be a man, it could be a woman, but we're broadening our lens to look at how care is factored into in our society. So I think that's just an important point because we want to validate the men who are playing those care responsibilities as well, and see how they then are affected by the conditions that we have made women have to accept to survive all along. So
I wanted to add something with regard to transportation, because women, we don't have a transportation system that focuses on the things that women have to do. So a lot of women also take care of their parents and so on. They're the one, they don't need the transportation at 8 a.m., but they may need the transportation at 10 a.m. Because that's when they have to go to the grocery, that's when they go to the hospital, that's when they go for medical and so on. So we have to start looking at things like that and saying, well, okay, how can we facilitate? How can we help women to be able to do the things that they are doing? Because we're still very different in terms of gender. Most of the transportation systems work on an 8 to 4 basis because people go to work at 8 and come back at 4, and they forget what happens in between that. There's another observation I have made whenever I go abroad. You see buses, and the buses simply have a step that comes down flat, and people are able to enter the bus. If you're in a wheelchair, if you have a stroller. In Trinidad, we don't have that. We still have all the steps, and we don't have the opportunity. So the country is not looking at how can we do things, how can we change the structures and systems so that everyone thrives. That's not what I am seeing. I'm seeing a lot of total disregard for what people need.
And you know what you said about before I might let Dr. Hussain, I'm going to probably wind up on us. I think when we started, you made a point at a very get-go, Denise, that this is about a love of Trinidad and Tobago. So this is not putting down any group or putting up any group or, or be critical for the sake of being critical or anything. It's about really love of country and wanting the best for every single person as best as we can. I think that's a message you have sent across in this discussion. And as for Dr. Gabriel Hussein, I think I have to go back to school and join your class
He is
because
welcome to come to my
yeah,
classes.
because you know what you did? You know what you did? I have to tell you, and I'll let you end the conversation. You know what you did? I think, and this is just my own perception, I think you really had a very even-handed approach to the issues. I don't, sometimes people think, oh, they're going to come and talk, this woman talk, and this woman this, and woman this. No, 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 no. It was so even-handed, and it was so logical and so sensible, and so much, ultimately, a love of humankind. That is what you brought. That's what I got out of your conversation. I don't know. The stereotypes are always there. The bitterness, this one, none of that. I got so much of you showing how everything is interrelated, and even understanding the man's point of view, and saying, they themselves are dealing with the same issues that women are dealing with. I mean, it's been a fantastic, elucidating, illuminating, maybe not as much for Denise, my co-host, who have a feeling very knowledgeable about these issues, but it has been very illuminating having you on, and you're such a I'm trying to remember the word in not where you have a moment of inspiration and clarity. I got that today from you.
And Dr. Hussain, as we
Thank you.
come to the end of this show, what would be the messages you'd want our listeners to keep from what you've been talking about?
Okay, well, in my last minutes, I would want to affirm what Karen said. Feminists are out here to challenge a world in which violence is determining so much of our lives, and to change that world so that it's built around care, whether that's care for children, such as there should be daycares on every corner instead of rum shops, whether that's in terms of care of the elderly, or care of persons with disabilities, or care of people. Care has to be the fundamental value. That's the first thing. And that's basically the feminist movement, right? The feminist movement is seeking to change the things we value, to give greater status and power to those, that caring, nurturing responsibility that we had typically assigned to women and assigned low status. That's the first thing. The second thing is, when you're thinking about gender out there, keep it simple. Just ask, what are the roles that people are playing, and how are they going to make them differently experience this scenario? What are their responsibilities, and what access to power do they have or not have? Those three questions alone are going to tell you a lot if you ask them in every setting. And the final thing I'm going to say is, everybody should be a Caribbean feminist, because everybody is invested in a world in which men are appreciated because they are, not because they're meeting masculine ideals, and in which women are free to exercise self-determination over their lives. Everybody wants that for themselves, or for their daughters, or for their sisters, or for their sons. And also, to be a Caribbean feminist simply means that we recognize that there are men, and we are prepared to challenge them to create a world that is more fair, more peaceful, more sustainable, and more loving. And if we could just go with that definition, see Caribbean feminists are out there as men and women. And I welcome you to join next year's International Women's Day March in your thousands.
I will be there. I'll be one quarter mile and something. I will be there. But Denise, I would like you, if you don't mind, as a co-host, and wonderful, wonderful co-host. And it was Denise who had you, Dr. Hussain, as our first guest. It was she that said to me, what do you think about Dr. Gabriel Hussain? I said, Denise, I'm going with you. Whatever you decide, I'm going with you. I have confidence in you. And I want you just to maybe thank you. And I hope this is the beginning of a whole new chapter, and let you wind up the show, because we do have about a minute left.
Thank you very much. And Gabby, thank you very much for being part of it because you provided so much information. My biggest takeaway from this show today is that this is not just a Trinidad thing, but it's a Caribbean thing. And until the Caribbean people really believe in who we are and think of how we can thrive, then we're not going to get very far. So thank you very much for leading all of that. And as we come to an end, I want to ask you, Karen, what are we talking about next week?
Okay, I'll probably think something hard. I'm going to think about the packaging. I know, one thing I slip staying away from that SSC matter.
Okay,
I stay away from that because you see that look like something I should stay away from. But I think the petrol, the economy, the IMF, and then since I think some international bank also said exactly what I think the IMF was saying, but was not saying. And so I think that I'd like to look at that and where the country is going because I think we're in a lot of trouble.
We are.
Maybe, yeah, I think we are in trouble. And feel free to suggest guests for us.
Yes.
I'm happy to have you. And thank you so much, Dr. Hussain. You were a breath of fresh air. Thank you, Denise, for agreeing to be a co-host. And next week, we will have people calling, but I don't think this time the conversation was so breathtaking that I think everybody was in class today, and then we're glad they went to class today.
Thank you.
And on our messaging board here, Elizabeth Bain said it's a real eye-opener and very informative. So a lot of people were glued to the information shared today.
Wonderful. It really was wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. David, Denise, Dr. Hussain, all of it. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to next week, and we'll talk Deniese, yes?
Yes, we will. All the best.
But we're not talking about running.
Thank you, ladies.
But don't run.
Yes. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Okay, then.
Right.
Bye.
Okay, thank you.
That's
Thank you,
it
Dr.
for
Hussain.
That's
Thank
it for
you.
today's edition of Hard Talk, Power 102 Digital Monday with Karen Nunez Tesheira and our new co-host, Denise Demming. We look forward to another exciting and informative edition come next Monday. Come tomorrow, Hard Talk Tuesday, we'll put a spotlight on Akua Keith of the Midco Pina Factory out there in Diego Martin and Mary Ann Braley of the Carnival Gallery. It will be very informative, so I invite you to join me. News straight ahead.